7th December 1941. It was a Sunday. On the beautiful Hawaiian island of Oahu, the sun was rising. The American Navy base at Pearl Harbor was just waking up from its sleep. The air was humid, and the ocean waves were gently touching the shores. It looked like the most peaceful place on earth. In the military barracks, young sailors were getting out of their beds. Some were having breakfast, some were getting ready for church, and others were planning to play baseball. The 8 massive American battleships, known as Battleship Row, stood proudly on the water. Looking at them, it felt like no one could ever touch America. But these young men had no idea that death was coming for them from thousands of miles away. North of Hawaii, about 230 miles out, a huge Japanese naval fleet was hiding in silence. This fleet included 6 aircraft carriers loaded with more than 400 deadly fighter planes and bombers. The attack had been planned by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto understood America's strength. He had warned his commanders, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." But Japan didn't have time. America had cut off Japan's oil supply. Japan believed that if they destroyed the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one single blow, America would be too scared to fight and would agree to peace. At 7:02 a.m., in a radar station on Oahu, 2 American soldiers, Private Lockard and Private Elliott, noticed something strange on the radar screen. Dozens of blips appeared, moving fast toward Hawaii. They immediately called their officer, but he assumed it was a group of American B-17 bombers arriving from the mainland. He said, "Don't worry about it." This became one of the biggest mistakes in history. Those were not B-17s. They were Japan's first wave, 183 fighter planes, loaded with explosives and hatred. At 7:55 a.m., a loud buzzing filled the sky. Sailors at Pearl Harbor looked up. They thought it might be an American drill. But then they saw the red sun symbol on the wings of the planes. Before anyone could react, the first bomb dropped. The ground shook. Explosions tore through Ford Island. Japanese pilots shouted the code words over the radio. "Tora! Tora! Tora!" Within moments, Pearl Harbor turned into a scene from hell. Japanese torpedo planes flew just above the water and launched their deadly torpedoes toward Battleship Row. The USS Oklahoma was hit by several torpedoes one after another. In just minutes, the massive ship capsized. More than 400 sailors were trapped inside, waiting for death in darkness and rising water.
But the most horrifying scene was the USS Arizona. At 8:06 a.m., a Japanese bomber dropped an armor-piercing bomb onto Arizona's deck. It plunged straight into the ship's gunpowder magazine and exploded. The blast was so powerful that the entire ship lifted into the air. A ball of fire shot into the sky. In seconds, 1,177 American sailors were burned alive. Arizona, once a symbol of American pride, became a floating graveyard. The ocean turned red with oil and blood. The air smelled of burning metal and flesh. Sailors who jumped into the water were burned alive by the flaming oil on the surface. Everywhere, there were screams, sirens, and the rattling guns of Japanese Zero fighters targeting anyone running on the ground. In the middle of this nightmare, heroes emerged. One of them was an African-American cook named Dory Miller. He had no training with weapons, but he rushed to the deck, grabbed a machine gun, and began firing at the Japanese planes. In a time when racism was still deep in American society, Miller proved that courage has no color. By 9:45 a.m., the attack was over. The Japanese planes flew away. Pearl Harbor was covered in smoke. 2,403 Americans were dead. 19 ships were sunk or destroyed. More than 300 aircraft burned on the ground. Japan believed they had broken America's spine, or so they thought. The news reached Washington, D.C. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was having lunch when he got the call. The Secretary of the Navy's voice was shaking. "Mr. President, Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor." Roosevelt fell silent. Until that moment, America had stayed out of World War II. Most Americans didn't want to get involved in the wars of Europe and Asia. But this one attack changed everything. The next day, December 8, 1941, Roosevelt appeared before Congress. He wheeled himself to the podium, and with anger and sorrow in his voice, he spoke the words that would live forever. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. In just 33 minutes, Congress declared war on Japan. America was in shock. People crowded the streets. Yesterday, many had said, "This isn't our war." Today, they stood in long lines at recruitment centers. The fire of revenge was burning in every American heart. Japan thought America would be afraid. They were wrong. They had not scared America. They had enraged America. This was the beginning of America's transformation. Roosevelt called in the top businessmen and factory owners. He told them, "I need tanks, I need ships, and I need them now." Overnight, America's entire industrial system changed. In Detroit, the factories that once made Ford and General Motors cars stopped production. No more cars. Now they made tanks, jeeps, and aircraft engines. At the Ford factory, a complete B-24 bomber rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes, a speed the world had never seen. Since men were leaving for war, women stepped into the factories. The poster of Rosie the Riveter was everywhere. Millions of American women who once only ran households were now welding metal, assembling engines, and building bombs. This was the biggest social change in America's history. The U.S. became the arsenal of democracy. Between 1941 and 1945, America built 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million military trucks. Compared to this, Japanese and German factories were nothing. Yamamoto's fear had come true. The giant had awakened, and it wasn't going to stop.
But building weapons wasn't enough. America had to win on the battlefield. Just 4 months after Pearl Harbor, America struck back. The Doolittle Raid. In April 1942, Colonel James Doolittle launched 16 B-25 bombers from the USS Hornet. The mission was nearly suicidal. They bombed Tokyo, Japan's heart. The physical damage was small, but the psychological shock was huge. The Japanese people, who believed they were untouchable, saw American planes over their homes. Then came June 1942, the Battle of Midway. Japan wanted to repeat Pearl Harbor by destroying the remaining American Navy. But this time, America had broken Japan's secret codes. Admiral Nimitz set a trap. When Japanese forces arrived to attack, American dive bombers swooped down on them. In just 5 minutes, yes, only 5 minutes, America destroyed 4 of Japan's largest aircraft carriers. These were the same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Japan's navy was broken. From this moment on, Japan could only defend. It could no longer attack. After Midway, America began its island-hopping strategy, pushing Japan back island by island. But it was brutal. Japanese soldiers refused to surrender. Their Bushido code taught them that death was better than dishonor. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, these names became symbols of horror for American Marines. Japan had built tunnels, caves, and bunkers. Every inch of land was paid for in blood. At Saipan, when defeat was certain, thousands of Japanese soldiers and civilians jumped from Banzai Cliff in mass suicide. American troops were shaken. This enemy wasn't afraid to die. By 1945, America reached Japan's doorstep, Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
At Iwo Jima's black volcanic sands, fighting raged for 36 days. This was where the famous photograph of 6 Marines raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi was taken. But the cost was enormous. 7,000 Marines were killed. Okinawa was even worse. Japan unleashed kamikaze attacks, suicide pilots crashing their planes into American ships. 12,000 Americans and more than 100,000 Japanese died. America realized that an invasion of Japan's home islands would cost 1 million American lives and possibly leave no Japanese alive. Then, President Truman received a report that changed the world forever. The Manhattan Project had succeeded. America had built the atomic bomb. Truman had 2 choices: launch a ground invasion and fight for months or years, or use this new weapon to end the war quickly. He chose the latter. On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the B-29 bomber Enola Gay reached Hiroshima. Pilot Paul Tibbets released the bomb. Little boy. 43 seconds later, a flash brighter than the sun erased the city. 70,000 people vaporized instantly. Buildings melted. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb hit Nagasaki. Japan, a nation that once vowed never to surrender, finally broke. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, America was a different country. Small military, slow industry, and a desire to stay out of global conflict. But in 1945, when the smoke cleared, America had become the world's greatest superpower. That one shocking morning at Pearl Harbor changed America forever. Stronger military, stronger economy, global leadership. But all of it came at the cost of the 2,403 lives lost that Sunday morning. The USS Arizona still lies beneath the water, and oil still leaks from it, known as black tears. These drops remind us that every great power and every transformation is paid for in blood. Japan tried to destroy America, but instead they unintentionally helped create the America we know today. As Yamamoto said, the giant had awakened.